Hello all, and thank you again for joining our security webcast, Make Smarter Decisions with Vendor Risk Management with Recorded Future and ServiceNow. Today, we will have our final episode of our security webcast, and with that, I'll pass it to Chris Bailey.
All right, well, thank you, Anna, and welcome to everybody. So we'll go ahead and jump into this here. So yeah, we are here to talk about vendor risk management today, kind of from two perspectives. Obviously, we recognize that some people might be new to vendor risk management on ServiceNow, and some people may just be looking for some ideas for how to mature their programs, so existing vendor risk management through some integrations and some external things that we'll take a look at. So in that spirit, I'm joined by some experts on both sides of that equation. So Glenn, why don't you, if you'd like to, feel free to introduce yourself real quick.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my name is Glenn Wong. I'm a director of product management at Recorded Future, a threat intelligence company that has partnered with Thirdera and ServiceNow to bring out several different integrations where we integrate our threat intelligence with ServiceNow to help our clients make faster, better decisions to minimize risk.
Awesome, thanks, Glenn. And then, Teresa, if you wanted to go ahead and just kind of describe a little bit about your role with vendor risk on ServiceNow.
Sure, thanks, Chris. My name is Teresa Law. I am the Director of Product Marketing for the GRC product, which includes our Vendor Risk Management product. Vendor Risk Management is really important to a lot of organizations. I focus on a lot of the outbound activities. I've been with ServiceNow for about 5 years and I absolutely love GRC and vendor risk. And so hopefully you guys are going to love this webinar.
Gotta appreciate the passion. Awesome. And then, real quick, I'm Chris Bailey. I'm a senior technical consultant with Thirdera, and I've helped a lot with the integrations and work in the security operations space and vendor risk space quite a bit. So thanks, appreciate it, everybody. So we'll all be kind of contributing here as we go through. Just to kind of set an agenda for what we're going to cover today, wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other security operations webcasts that we've done. So we'll just kind of talk through where we've been, and that way if anybody's interested, maybe we'll have some ability to go back and take a look at those as well. We want to talk a little bit, like we said, about that first angle of what vendor risk looks like on ServiceNow. So if anybody's kind of new to the product, maybe evaluating it, we can talk a little bit about some of the advantages there, some of the value that customers have been able to derive by switching over to using ServiceNow for that experience. And then we want to switch over and talk about external integration. That gets to that maturity model of saying, how do we take that practice on ServiceNow and start to integrate it with some of these other areas so we can get more mature, start reacting faster, and increase that value especially. And then we'll do a little bit of a demo. We want to dive into the instance, show you a little bit of what that data is going to look like. It helps you, maybe visualize how I can take advantage of this. And it's not just some slides saying, hey, look, this is really important, but we really want to show you like, hey, you can get in here and there's some quick wins and things that'll really help you out. So starting out real quick, just wanted to recap the series just for anybody that didn't have a chance to attend those first two but might be interested. You can see episodes 1 and 2, we did a little bit of discussions about vulnerability response and security incident. Those are obviously two other areas that Recorded Future has integrations for. But we really wanted to talk about in each of those the platform itself, so how it handles vulnerability response and security incident response, and then how Recorded Future can also take those leaps, and that data is going to enable you to get additional value, looking at those modules as well. So if anybody's interested in those, we'll have a link a little bit later in the presentation that we can share, so if anybody wants to go back and view those. And then we are jumping into episode 3 here on vendor risk. So with that, for this opener, we really wanted to talk about kind of the value of using vendor risk on ServiceNow, and for that I'm going to hand it over to the expert. And Teresa, why don't you take it away?
Thanks so much. Vendor risk has actually become, or supply chain risk management, whichever one, it has really become a hot topic. I think a lot of that has been driven by the pandemic. A lot of organizations realized that they had a gap in their risk management programs because they were not appropriately managing the risk posed by their vendors, as evidenced by the supply chain disruption that a lot of organizations faced. Ransomware to supply chains is another big hot topic lately. A lot of attacks recently along that line, and that's kept the supply chain risk management, vendor risk management in the news also. And all that really speaks to how important it is to manage the risk posed by your vendors, because your vendor community is actually growing. 63% of companies are seeing the same or larger numbers of vendors that they're working with. So that's one of the big issues is when you've got vendors and you're not actually managing the risk, there are a lot of issues that could occur. The breach remediation is only the tip of the iceberg actually reputation damage or loss of customers can be even bigger. I don't know how many of you heard the saying that you can outsource your business services, but you can't outsource your liability. And to that, I mean, I would say to people, we've had a lot of breaches recently that have involved third parties. How many people actually remember the name of the vendor that caused the breach? And I would say almost none of us. But everybody can name the name of the company that was actually breached. So it's so critical to manage that information. A lot of the times, even if you're using solutions, they're immature. They're manual processes that don't scale. You've got no business context. So when you have a risk that you identify, it's hard to determine what the impact of the business is. And also, you know, one of the biggest problems is there's so much data and it's scattered across your entire organization that you've got these data silos. So being able to create an integrated, holistic view of risk is almost impossible. It takes such a long time. And by the time you actually get the information together, the information is stale. Now, the good news is that ServiceNow Vendor Risk Management can actually help. So on the next slide, I actually have one of my favorite success stories. This is the city and county of Denver. Now, Denver has a significant vendor population that they're managing, and they have new vendors that they're onboarding all the time. They were sending out questionnaires that were about 300 questions long, which took a huge amount of time to answer. And a lot of those questions were not even relevant to the particular vendor that they were assessing. So with ServiceNow, what they did, and the one thing I loved about Julie is, you know, she recognized the problem and she wasn't looking for perfection. So they identified vendor risk management as the thing that they wanted to use to address this problem. But instead of taking the time to make sure everything was perfectly lined up, from the time that they signed to purchase the product, they were actually able to go live in 3 months. Very, very quickly. The thing that they were most concerned about is the size of the assessment. So what they were able to go live with was a pretty complete vendor risk management application, but they knew they had to fine tune it. She wasn't looking to fine tune everything as a go live. But what they did is, instead of sending out 300 question assessments, they were able to determine, based upon what the vendor was going to be doing, individual questionnaires that specifically spoke to the kinds of questions that they wanted to ask. And what that did was it reduced the amount of time that it took to get the information back from the vendors. And then instead of going through all of the assessments manually and scoring the assessments, they were able to use vendor risk management to automate the assessment scoring. And so they reduced that whole process by 66%, which was just huge. And part of it by reducing the survey size by 60%, because they were no longer sending out those 300 question surveys. The other thing that we discovered, and we heard this about from a lot of customers, is not only was Julie's team happy, but the vendors were really excited, because this was no longer an onerous process that they were going through, filling out spreadsheets, answering questions. This is an online form. And the other thing that we discovered, and we heard this a lot also, is not only did they get the information back more quickly, but they had better quality answers. So, you know, I would say that managing your vendor risk is absolutely imperative. With vendor risk management, you're able to use an intuitive user experience. Your vendors are going to be happy. And you can also integrate ServiceNow Vendor Risk Management with a larger risk management, enterprise risk management product to give you that holistic view of risk across your entire enterprise. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Chris to let you walk you through the elements of vendor risk management.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks, Teresa. It's a really great overview of some of the value proposition here. I wanted to take an opportunity out of that to kind of dive into, what does that look like on the ServiceNow platform when we start saying, how do we take advantage of all those opportunities? So you can see on the left side, I mean, one of the first activities that we're doing with vendor risk management is trying to get our arms around who is in our vendor portfolio. We want to be able to manage all of that stuff in one place. So we're going to be doing some integrations with procurement, other places inside your organization that might have pieces of that data, contracts and such, and trying to bring that together with the idea that then somebody can do kind of that onboarding assessment, that vendor tiering, and trying to determine what sort of relationships do we have to these vendors, how critical are they? And those are some things that we'll show you as we dive into the platform to show you kind of how those operations can take place. But the real value proposition, comes as we don't just gather that data, but now we start getting to that middle, life cycle part. How are we managing these vendors? So, those common like big paperwork or Excel spreadsheet heavy processes that Teresa's describing, that assessment process can be very burdensome. It's a common, point of contention. And taking that and integrating it into the ServiceNow vendor portal and working through that life cycle so that we can send an assessment off to a vendor. The vendor can respond right through the portal. The vendor has the ability to manage the contacts who are going to be responding to that assessment right through the portal so that you on your side don't have to keep track of who am I sending this off to, who all is involved. There's definitely value in those propositions. When a vendor sends an assessment back and there's an issue that you want to highlight, we can handle issue remediation and risk through the vendor portal as well. And that whole conversation then gets documented. It's associated with the same records. So having that single point of view from both sides is where a lot of the expediency, a lot of that efficiency starts to work its way in. And then there's reports and other things that we can do on the back end. There's, as Teresa, I think, even also kind of hinted at, there's links that we can do to other GRC controls so that we can take action through a holistic risk program outside of just vendor risk. We might be able to take some of this data and tie it into contract management. So as that contract is coming up for renewal, now we start to be able to make intelligent decisions about, are we renewing with this vendor? Are we looking for other vendors? How risky are those vendors? So those are all things that we can start to do as we take advantage of this data on the platform. And like I said, some of you may already be doing really, really well at this. And that's also one of the gists of what we want to do with this conversation was allow you to say, okay, well, also if we're good at this and we've gotten to this point, where do we go next? So for that, we wanted to bring Glenn in and talk a little bit about some of the advantages and value that Recorded Future could offer in this equation as well. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And to build on both what Chris and Teresa were just saying, let me actually start right in the middle of this slide where we talk about the questionnaires and the manual efforts. I think those of you who are familiar with this process, and then as Teresa and Chris were just talking about, a lot of vendor risk management centers currently around questionnaires, but they tend to be point in time, right? And depending on the processes you may have in place, they can be onerous. The quality of the information you get out may be challenging, especially if there are questionnaires that have long forms that aren't always tuned to what your different vendors need to fill out or may be pertinent to them. And it's hugely manual, right? So it's very resource intensive and time consuming. In addition, and this is where I go maybe to the left and far right of the top four pictures here, you also are getting information directly from the vendor, but you may not necessarily know what kind of risk environment they themselves are in, unless you've specifically asked those questions. Then you're sort of relying on them to answer for themselves. But there may be other risk factors to that industry, to that particular vendor that they themselves may not be aware of. That would be important for you to be aware of because it does impact your business continuity or some of your own risk from attacks. And then on the far right, there may be information that your own security team knows that may impact some of your risk assessments of your vendors. And sometimes that information gets siloed and isn't easily shared from, say, a security team to a vendor management team. So for all of those different reasons, we believe that there are ways that you can improve and add value from an external threat intelligence source such as Recorded Future to give you better information to augment your risk assessments of your vendors. And then down below is just a reinforcement of some of the points that Teresa had made earlier. These are based off of a Ponemon study that was probably pre-pandemic. And so you can only imagine that these numbers have increased in the interim, right? As the dependencies on third parties has increased, as Teresa mentioned. But a large number, I think, as we all know, of breaches happen because of third parties, and oftentimes the risk assessments are ad hoc or on an as needed basis, right, as opposed to a continuous system of improvement. So next slide. So how does Recorded Future help out? And again, I'd be happy to answer questions around what Recorded Future is in detail. But one of the core things is that we are a threat intelligence company that is continuously monitoring information that's available across the web through open sources, through proprietary partnerships, and detailed analysis that our own research team is doing to understand what kind of risks are out there, who is affected by them, and where that information could lead to elevated risk. That information is done on an automated basis, 24/7, 365 days a year. And that information about different companies, which ones may have been breached, which ones may have had been suffering from a ransomware attack, or might be have exposed credentials out on dark web sources. All of that information gives you some sense of what kind of cyber risk an organization may face, and then that information can then be bubbled up to a company level and then shared within, in this case, a ServiceNow platform to help you assess which of your vendors may be at elevated risk. So, the assessments and the surveys that you do are an important piece of a vendor risk management program, but also having continuous monitoring using information that is out there but is difficult to assemble is something where you could leverage to help up your game and improve your risk profiling. So with that, it's easy to talk about like this, but I think it's much easier to understand when you get to see it. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris to walk you through a live demo.
Awesome. Thanks, Glenn. It's one of those things where I wish PowerPoint had a feature where I could just drill in and open this laptop right here and it would pop up, because that's exactly what we're going to try to dig into here, is some of this recorded future data on ServiceNow. So let me take a moment and we'll jump right over to our demo site. And yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback off of the things that Glenn and Teresa were talking about here. We want to get into the platform and show you some examples of what does this look like. And again, I still, don't want to just jump straight into the, like the how do I get to Recorded Future. I understand there may be some people that are just seeing vendor risk for the first time. So going to real quickly just kind of walk through some of the quick things. This isn't a training course, and I'm not going to, belabor every point. But really wanted to show you guys some things that we can do on the platform. So you can see there's ServiceNow obviously has these concepts of dashboards, and with Recorded Future we're going to start to deliver some of this monitoring. Just like Glenn was mentioning, we can very quickly identify vendors with high risk scores, people with ransomware attacks that have happened real recently. Those are the types of things that we're going to start to dig into, and I want to show you just some pieces that are involved in that, and then how do we get there. So starting at the beginning of this whole process, we talked a little bit about vendor portfolio and how we're going to populate those things. Again, that might be something that we're integrating to other sources, on the procurement and contract and those sides. We can also populate those things automatically. So I'm going to flip views over here, show you what your vendor risk profile might look like in the absence of Recorded Future, and then we'll also take a little bit of a look at like what this might look like when we add that on top. So for starters, I just have my Acme Corp here, and they're just a manufacturer in my organization here. And we can do all the normal things. We can populate some of our contact information for this place. We can contact the addressing, and we can start to link that to other records in ServiceNow because we've built these records. In a normal vendor risk sense, what we can do from here is we would want to do a tiering assessment, which is kind of, again, that picture of how important is this vendor? How critical are they to my business? What sort of relationship do I have to them? What do they do for me? So that's something that the platform will handle automatically, through the same interface. And with a tiering assessment, I can just show you a quick example. This would be auto-generated. So for my Acme Corp, I can go ahead and, because it's a high-tier vendor, it can generate a high-tier assessment. And I'm going to click down into my assessment instance here, this individual example of the questions that I'm going to be responding to, and just show you an example of what this would look like on the platform. So you can very quickly put together questions that sort of describe the nature of your relationship to a vendor. So how can I characterize my relationship? So they're a strategic partner. Does this vendor provide a strategic, a competitive advantage? And throughout this process, we can attach weights and scores to each of these, which tells us, like, is this an extremely critical vendor, or is this the landscape company that, hey, maybe I don't want to send them an assessment every 3 months that's 300 questions long, because we may not even get to the end of that process in 3 months. So that's what we're doing up front on this process. We want to establish just the nature of those relationships so we understand what are we really trying to get out of these assessments. We don't want to go through these lengthy processes, unless it's really something that is going to be beneficial to us and the vendors in this relationship. So that's just one example of what the tiering assessment is going to look like. When I back up here to my Acme Corp, you can see there's a concept over here on the right of vendor tier. So based on those questions that I had answered previously, it's going to set a tier. And then based on that, I can build rules into the platform that describe, do I want to assess this vendor every 6 months? Do I want to assess them once a year? Who are the people that need to be involved in that process? So that's what we're really trying to get at here through the vendor tiering. Then based on the vendor tier being set, we can also trigger things. So I can say, if a vendor is high, maybe I want to send an assessment to them right now. If they were high and we reassess them and now they're in the critical tier because the nature of our relationship has changed, maybe we want to immediately trigger an assessment based on that tier change from high to critical. So based on those, I'm just going to take another scroll down here and take a look at an assessment. You can see an example here, actually, that when I filled out that tiering assessment earlier, it auto-generated a risk assessment due to the tier changing. So I'm just going to open this up and take a quick example. And this gets back to what Teresa was even talking about, right? That the lengthy process of sending these questionnaires out to vendors and getting the responses back. This is a record that's going to manage the process, and we'll even get into the portal here and show how the vendors and vendor risk managers on our side will interact throughout that process. So there's an assessment that we would create, which goes out to the vendor, and then someone on our side can do exactly what Teresa was describing. I can look at these questionnaires and say, which pieces of information do I need to gather from this organization? So I can go ahead and edit this list, and I can, through common integrations, I might have SIG or other templates that I might be using. My organization may have its own vendor risk practice for high and critical vendors. Any combination of narrowing it down to the questionnaires that are critical to your business, we can do that. And then based on the assessments that we were to, add over here to this right column, we could send those off to our vendor. And that's as simple as a click of a button. You can see that basically on this screen, by changing the state here to submit it to vendor and clicking a button, I'm able to submit that out to my Acme Corp, and they're going to get an email. Their primary contact is going to be able to respond. So in that spirit, just showing you a little bit more around the platform, I am going to impersonate the infamous John Jovi, who is going to be my Acme Corp vendor manager for this one. And I'm going to jump right on over here into my vendor portal. And let me go ahead and just refresh this guy. All right, so here's an example for Acme Corp. I've logged in as my end user. And like I said, the vendor is going to get an email. They'll have a link that brings them right into this vendor portal. So there's no bookmarking, there's no additional memorization. It's a process that can be managed, directly. And then the vendor, by drilling in on their organization here that they're part of, is going to see that assessment, that same auto-generated risk assessment here. And those titles are configurable. They're not all going to have auto-generated XYZ on here. Just an example of what they're going to see. But when a vendor opens this up, you're going to see that those two things that I asked for, that SIG questionnaire and there was a document request where they can upload documents as well, are going to show up as things that they need to respond to. So right from this interface, the vendor can go ahead and perhaps open up this SIG questionnaire. They can start to respond to all these questions. And I think the demo site may be giving me a hiccup for a second or two, but we will give it a moment. There we go. And you can see a SIG questionnaire obviously is one of those questionnaires like Teresa described. Some of these can get very lengthy and they have many sections with lots and lots of questions, right? But if your business requires that, you also have the option to use, these types of templates as well. But then, each of these questions can be responded to by the vendor. They can save their place in the middle of any of these. So we can, answer 6 of these questions. And if the day is ending or I need somebody else to respond to a different portion, they can save their work in progress, just by hitting save here. And it's not like a lot of other websites where they're going to go in and if they don't submit that entire form, they may lose all their work. So that's something to definitely highlight as well. And then the other thing is getting to that other parts of the wheel where we talk about issues and remediation. A vendor may come in and say, they have a formalized risk governance plan here. and it's amazing. If we really needed more detail than that your risk governance plan is amazing, those are things that the vendor risk manager could highlight as an issue, and we can have that conversation back and forth. So if a vendor submits this and sends it to our side, right through this same interface, we can be having that conversation and documenting those changes to this record to say, hey, we need more information than just this, or we need you to upload this additional document and XYZ. So those are the types of things that we can manage directly through the portal. And I just wanted to give everybody kind of a brief idea of what that looks like. Like I said, there's other mechanisms in here. So like the Acme team manager can manage their team, as we mentioned earlier. So you no longer have to keep track of all the contacts for the vendor who might be involved in submitting these responses as well. He'd be able to come in and create additional contacts and send email invitations to those parts of his company directly. So did want to cover that. And now I think what I'd like to do is, instead of focusing on just what ServiceNow can do, also wanted to give you guys a picture of what vendor risk looks like when recorded future is included in the mix. So we started out with kind of that picture of what does Acme Corp look like, in a bubble. How do we work through that vendor risk process? We can send the assessments, we get them back. But then I also wanted to take a look at what does it look like with recorded future here? So I'm going to just flip over to a different company just as an example. So I've got my Widget Makers Inc., which is a primary competitor to Acme, I'm sure. With Widget Makers, what we have here with the recorded future view is a couple data elements that we didn't have before, and there's going to be some things that will help. As we described earlier, like we were talking about with Glenn, the idea that there are all these things external to the organization that we're also monitoring, and we can get those things into ServiceNow and start to build ways to take action on those. So you can see, not only did I get just a recorded future risk score, and I may have 3 other vendors that are all also monitoring my vendors, and I may be aggregating those. There are multiple ways of consuming these scores and averaging them and figuring out what you want to do in your given program. But just having access to this type of data can be important for taking some of those next steps and figuring out how to derive additional value from the things that you're doing. So when you take these risk scores, from recorded future, like we said, you can use this to drive the security tier or risk rating that this vendor is a part of. So I can say that, okay, if the security score, for instance, of this vendor is 97 on a scale of 0 to 100, this might be something that's extremely critical. And maybe I do want to kick off, an assessment to them and say, hey, we're seeing a lot of activity here. Like, why is that? Another thing to highlight about the recorded future score, one simple thing here, I've got the access to this recorded future intelligence card. So if there's data down here that I maybe don't have a full view of, or I want to dig into and understand a little bit more, I can even link over into the recorded future site. And by logging into my recorded future subscribed application, I can dig in and get all of the information and all the virtualization or visualization that recorded future would typically offer about a given vendor. So there's a full deep linking integration right there. But you do get a view right inside of ServiceNow of why does this vendor get a score of 97? Why are they considered so risky? And you can actually see on this vendor that we've seen a lot of activity actually right in the last 24 hours. So that was kind of convenient that we picked this one. In the last 24 hours, we've seen a really high uptick. If you look back to, over a month ago, we had like a couple things, but it really wasn't as much going on. But in the last couple days, we've definitely seen an uptick of, lots of activity going on. And each of these risk rules is going to describe what recorded future has been observing through all the different ways that it monitors what's going on with these vendors. So you can see that there's been misconfigurations and vulnerabilities in company infrastructure. So there's different scanning that might be going on. You might see things like typo squatting. So typo squatting being an example of saying this company has, a given domain. So for widget makers, it's widgetmakers.com. We saw a typo squat where somebody put in widgetmarkers.com and tries to take advantage of these common typos that somebody might accidentally make, right? So it's not necessarily that every single one of those is extremely interesting in and of itself, but each of them contributes to that picture of why are things potentially risky. There's all sorts of information here, DNS or so I say self-signed certificates that might be expired, or other DNS vulnerabilities that can be monitored for. So each of these has different pieces that they can offer you, and some of those might be actionable. we might decide that based on a given type of these, we actually want to take additional actions. So we could do things with the platform in ServiceNow to do workflows or business rules to create an incident. If this was an immediate threat that somebody needed to respond to, we can do those things because now we have that intelligence, we have that view to say there's something happening that we didn't know about before, and maybe this really is something that we do want to take action on. So wanted to highlight that that's really one of the advantages of having a window or a pane to this type of information, is that it'll enable you to do things on your end to potentially mitigate that cyber risk. I may say, okay, there's a typo squad on this domain. Well, that's something for the vendor to solve. But if that's a critical vendor to me, and it's likely that somebody could potentially try to use a phishing attack or something that redirects to that domain, maybe there are actions that I could take on my end to start actually monitoring for links to that domain, so that we're not taken advantage of as part of this campaign. So there are things to think about, opportunities. And again, you don't want to necessarily act on every single one of these, but it is something that we just wanted to highlight was available. Another thing that is also of interest, like we said, as this score changes, the platform offers you automated ways of responding to that as well. So it doesn't have to just be something where you look at every single one of those risk rules. The platform, through Vendor Risk, also is going to offer you, you can see Vendor Risk is a large module with a lot of the things that we've talked about. It's populating my vendors, my tiering assessments, and lots of different configuration options. So I want to scroll down a little bit and just highlight one in particular right now because it's very relevant to this equation. There's a concept of provider-based submission rules with the idea that a provider or a recorded future is giving you these scores. It's giving you a part of this information. And so they can say, recorded future says this vendor is a critical tier. It's at a 97 out of 100. What I can do with a provider-based submission rule is I can start to automate things to happen on the platform. So real quickly wanted to highlight how that looks without getting into the weeds too much of what you need to configure. But I can create this rule and I can determine which vendors it applies to. So I might have a filter here that says these are my high and critical vendors. And then I can take certain actions. So I can configure the platform really quickly here to, hey, if a vendor goes into my high or critical tier, maybe I do want to create an assessment to that vendor. Maybe I want to create an issue and kind of have that conversation with the vendor and says, hey, we saw this typo squat domain, warning real recently. Is that something that you want to take a look at? Or do I want to create a task for somebody on my side? So if I want to update my spam filters or something of that nature, you can take those actions based on what you think are the appropriate responses to these types of changes. So I really wanted to just highlight that that some of these things were options. Like I can automatically submit my assessment to the vendor, so my vendor risk team doesn't even need to review it in a critical enough situation. So I guess we're getting to about halfway through the hour here. So I do want to give an opportunity for people to respond to questions. Be happy to jump back into the interface if there's any particular questions. But yeah, why don't I hand it over? So Anna, are you seeing any questions in the chat that you want to bring up?
Sure, we have a few here. First question is, do I have to buy anything else to use vendor risk management? What licenses are required?
Okay, I think I'll take that one. So we're finding, with vendor risk management, the nice thing is you don't have to buy everything to get it. It's very easy to purchase just vendor risk management. And with it, you get all the different capabilities that Chris went over to be able to tier and assess and identify those risks that your vendors are posing to you, and significantly increasing your productivity.
Awesome, thank you. There are a few more questions that we can get to. One of them is, how well does the vendor risk management tool scale? Can I use other risk use cases like managing acquisitions?
Yeah, I'll take that one also. So, we have very, very, very large customers that are using vendor risk, thousands of vendors that they're managing around the world. And then we have very small implementations. So it really does scale for your needs. I mean, one of the things is it's a cloud-based solution. It's based upon our platform. So highly scalable, highly flexible, being able to, one of the things Chris talked about is being able to send out assessments and recognizing that there's a change in your vendor's risk posture. You know, the platform allows you to be very nimble when you see something and send out either an assessment that you've already identified or one that you just create very quickly to your vendors just to get an idea of whether or not they're patching, for example, something that they need to be patched because there's a new vulnerability that's on the market. So, you know, very flexible, very scalable.
Awesome, thank you. There is one more question. What are some first steps for us to take if we want to use Recorded Future for VRM?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Anna. So the short answer is you could get a subscription and have it installed. The longer answer is that the applications are available through the ServiceNow App Store. And so you can download the applications themselves, you know, look at some of the documentation in there, see some of the use cases and such on the data sheets. But ultimately, to power those integrations, you do need a valid API token. And that is something that you would you know, subscribe to a Recorded Future, and we would issue once that's taken care of. Just if you're in a mode where you want to, you know, test it out first and see if it's something you'd want as part of your long-term solution. Certainly, you could work with our sales teams, and we can set up trial runs, if you will. What's the phrase I'm looking for? But you know, a short trial period where you could have it working for a week or two. The objective there is that obviously for you to test it out, see if it fits your regimen, but also before we do those, we typically you know, have some discovery to understand exactly what things you're looking for, make sure that the kind of solution and intelligence we're delivering will meet those needs, and have some agreed upon goals to be able to say, you know, if these things are met, then this is a successful trial, so that the endpoint of that trial is understood from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just to kind of hop in there, as I'm thinking as you're talking, Glenn, you know, the ability to continuously monitor is so very important. I mean, I think it was Glenn, you that mentioned the point in time assessments. I think everyone would understand that if I'm assessing a vendor now and it's September, if I wait until next September to assess the vendor, there's a lot that could potentially change. Just think about how quickly we see these new ransomware attacks occurring or other vulnerabilities that are occurring. You really need to be able to continuously monitor. And although I love my vendor risk management product very much, you know, by sending out an assessment, I'm really getting a very subjective view of somebody's environment. So if I ask Chris, hey, you know, are you patching in the SLA that we've defined of 72 hours? Are you going to say no? That's just something people don't do. But yeah, maybe okay, so you're kind of patching most of the time, so you say yes. But with Recorded Future, you can actually see whether or not that's actually occurring. So you're getting a very objective view on a continuous basis. So the two of these things put together is what's so very powerful and gives you that real-time view of what's happening, so you can take action as quickly as possible, which is obviously what you want to do if there's an attack.
Right, and then just to build on that too, you know, if you do see indications of an attack or a breach or some sort of reason that risk may be elevated, you know, the next steps that you might have to take, or at least to assess how big a risk that event may pose, will require some research, right? Because you may not know what that ransomware flavor is, or, you know, what is how critical is that vulnerability that just got disclosed, right? And so, you know, again, you can do a Google search and try to find that information, but this is the sort of thing where Recorded Future also can be a great, powerful ally and tool, because we have that kind of information, you know, with just a few clicks of the button. As Chris mentioned, in, you know, the app in the integration, we have a way to click in and get more detailed information about a specific company and their risk profile. But we also have just general information in our portal that says, you know, here are some of the common, you know, or here are some of the threat actors and their common modes of attack, or here are some of the known issues with this particular ransomware or this vulnerability. So, when you present this to your leadership and say, oh, we've got some of our critical vendors that have been subject to a breach or appear to have higher vulnerability exposure than we would like, the next question is going to come like, well, what do we have to do about it, and how important is that? And again, Recorded Future can help provide you with some of those answers so that you know what to do next. And that's an important part of how to make threat intelligence actionable.
Yeah, and I to put a plug in for the platform, I think this is a conversation that it's at high levels. CISO for them are interested in this, and once you've identified that there's an incident or an event or a threat that you want to take action on, if you think about the last 2 webinars that you guys hopefully listened to, because we're a platform, you're able to then use our security operations application or vulnerability response or security incident response application, because we share data, because it is a platform. So you can very quickly and very easily orchestrate that change or that action that needs to occur, quarantining a device, whatever that needs to occur to be able to address that threat and mitigate the risk that you're seeing to your enterprise. So it's really one of those lovely, closed loops that we've got.
Awesome. Yeah, excellent response, guys. And I was going to say too, to your point, Glenn, when you're talking about just gathering, this information, I think that's part of it is when you go back, to these other vendors and you actually have some of this, data, you can say like, okay, it's not just that we're asking you this question and you're saying yes or no, but we actually understand that these things are going on. You start to have a little more leverage in that process, and you start to have a more transparent communication about, what's all going on through that process too, which I think in the long term helps to build this more successful relationship. So,
and it also helps internally in making decisions, because if you've got a vendor that is offering a lot of challenges, maybe you need to start thinking about finding an alternate vendor. I mean, it's that kind of visibility is so critically important to the success of an organization.
Agreed. Excellent. Anna, do we have any other ones? Are you?
I think that's it. All good.
Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and just give a little wrap up here. So if anybody is interested in any more information, we'll have some content available. Right from ServiceNow, there's quite a bit of vendor risk management information available out on the webpage. If you look under governance, risk, and compliance, you can dig into vendor risk specifically out there. And Recorded Future also has an annual intelligence summit coming up. So I don't know if Glenn, you had any other words about, the summit itself.
No, I'd love to plug it, and thanks, Chris.
Sure.
So we do an annual summit, as Chris mentioned. It's coming up in October, and it's called Predict. It is free. So now in this sort of virtual world, it's something that anyone can participate in. It's a number of live and recorded sessions on a huge range of topics. And it is open to all comers. So, whether you're a client or whether you're just considering a Recorded Future and are, want to learn more, you are welcome to sign up. If you are an existing client, we do have some client-only sessions where we dive a little bit deeper or show a little bit more privileged information. But certainly, if you are new to Recorded Future, you are more than welcome. And at that link, you can get more information about how to sign up.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn. And just to close it out, so this has been Chris with Thirdera. So Thirdera is the largest pure play service partner out there. So if you are interested in doing projects like this with ServiceNow, we'd be happy to have a conversation and hook you up with resources who could help you make these things happen. Also, if you're looking for more content like this, you can follow us on all the LinkedIns and Instagrams and little icons that you see there in the upper right. Obviously, we have a lot of video content and blogs and things coming out fairly frequently. If you have other ITSM or areas of interest on the platform, we have quite a bit of expertise in-house to help you out with those things as well. I got some email contact right there if you'd like to reach out to myself and be happy to talk to anybody that's interested. So I would like to thank Teresa and Glenn for all their time and expertise to help us provide some educational content. And thank you guys for paying attention, and we will see you in the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Take care now. Take care.